Sonic the Hedgehog, if you've ever watched my channel, is a series that means a great deal to me. The often innocuous adventures of the Blue Hedgehog tend to get a bad rap for its wealth of interesting fans and a perceived lack of polish. I have very contrarian views about this subject, of course, but that's not exactly what I'm here to talk about today. A pervasive criticism that has followed the Sonic series throughout its early 3D era, and especially through its tumultuous comic run with Archie Comics, is the idea that Sonic stories that tried to be serious and darkly toned were just playing against what made Sonic Sonic. It was an unnecessarily gritty direction for a series that was so bright, vibrant, and cartoony. And to a degree, I understand where this criticism comes from. Tone is very important to maintain in a work, and to introduce drama or stakes is fine, but you've got to balance that appropriately, depending on what kind of property you're handling. Some people have the opinion that Sonic in general is not a concept equipped to deal with these more dramatic stories. I, on the other hand, couldn't disagree more, and it's because of one particular example that I think got it extremely right. Sonic the Hedgehog, most commonly known as Sonic SatAM by its fans due to its Saturday morning time slot, was one of two early animated television shows based on the Sonic series created by Deke Productions. The other, Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, was aired on weekdays and generally focused on a more slapstick comedic tone. SatAM, on the other hand, features a darker and grimmer world where Sonic is a member of the Knothole Freedom Fighters, a band of teenagers living in secrecy in the woods, hiding out from the tyrannical leader, Dr. Robotnik, who overthrew their once peaceful city of Mobotropolis and rechristened it to Robotropolis. After taking over the city, Robotnik captured and enslaved most of the general population, turning them into mindless worker robots to provide endless labor in his many polluted factories. Meanwhile, he and his nephew Snively devised machines meant to drive out, reveal, or otherwise capture the remaining freedom fighters, and similarly enslave them. Sonic is no stranger to animation, of course. There have been numerous other screen iterations of the character over time. The aforementioned Adventures series, the 1996 OVA by Studio Parrot, the 1999 series Sonic Underground, the early 2000s anime Sonic X, and many others. SatAM among them was fairly short, having aired from September 18th of 1993 to December 3rd of 1994 for a total of 26 episodes. Except there was meant to be more. When will he come back from the war? My son! Well, you see, Season 2 of Sonic SatAM ends on a rather large cliffhanger, foreshadowing the rise of new villains, the comeuppance of Robotnik, and an entirely new conflict that would reshape the scope of the entire show to that point. It was something a lot of people, myself included, would have wanted to see go down, but unfortunately the show was cancelled before this dream could ever come to pass. There are several reasons why the show was cancelled, but I'd rather not go into all of them right away. Before you can understand why this matters, you need to understand why this show was actually great. You need to understand why, in my opinion, this show is actually a buried classic that deserves more credit than it receives, and certainly deserves new fans. You need to understand why Sonic SatAM was the cartoon we deserved. And I think if you give me time to explain, I can convince you. So join me on this horrifyingly disjointed stream of consciousness. So join me on this informative and comprehensive video essay, and I'll lay it all out for you. Stay in your seats, don't click away. Let me show you the ways of my people. The Sonic fans, I guess?
Alright! Way past cool!
So, how'd we get here? How did this get turned into this, with everything that followed it? How do you turn a game like Sonic the Hedgehog, so early on into its life cycle and without much story to speak of, into a fully realized and conceivable television world? Well, After the success of the first Sonic game, Sega of America was eager to expand the universe of their furry blue mascot into other forms of media. To capitalize on their success and broaden the franchise's appeal, it was DiC Entertainment that acquired the television rights for adaptation, having already made successful video game cartoons like the Super Mario Bros. Super Show and Captain N. Their first Sonic series was Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog, a light-hearted series based mostly upon humor of the slapstick variety. When presented to ABC executives, they weren't sold on the tone and the animation quality, and asked DiC to workshop their concept. The wackier show concepts would go on to development for syndication, while DiC began working on another slightly darker series to win over the hearts of the ABC executives and what they were asking for. The earliest known designs for the show, published in a 1993 Sonic poster magazine, held on to the established cast and the early Western promotional artwork, albeit with heavily redesigned characters. Ultimately, these early concepts would be far from resembling the actual and final product, featuring some rather interesting and often downright questionable concepts. But he gets out of jams just as fast as he got into them, by jumping up, windmilling his red sneakered feet into a blur, hitting the ground with the chirp, and rocketing OS? What is he, a Macintosh? Leaving a trail of smoking skid marks that burst into flame in his wake as he yells out his signature Sonic farewell. Hasta la vista, mista. Oh man. Oh, thank God they did not stick with that idea. It was Lynn Jansen, the main story editor of both seasons, that would help evolve the series into its final incarnation as seen in the released product. Being one of the main authors of the series Bible, he laid out the main players of the cast, defined their personalities and relationships, and solidified most of the concepts that would help structure the series going forward. From almost day one of the show's production, Len would have to go head-to-head with Sega on multiple occasions. Because of how far removed from the game canon the show was, he was forced to often defend alterations to the story and characters, trying to convey that each was done for the sake of the betterment of the series and the goals it set out to accomplish. Though it can definitely be said that Sonic SatAM is the most in-name only of the franchise's screen adaptations, it's clear to see that it has a unique and cohesive identity of its own, just by watching a handful of episodes. This is a huge reason that, despite its disconnect from the rest of the series canons, SatAM still enjoys a fairly sizable cult following and fan base of its own to this day, with many of its fans preferring its style of story to even the modern incarnations of Sonic. The series premiered on September 18, 1993 on ABC's Saturday morning lineup. The first episode that aired was Sonic Boom, with the actual pilot episode not airing until December 11th. The second season premiered on September 10, 1994, with Sonic Conversion. The finale aired on December 3rd of 1994, though reruns would continue to air throughout May of 1995. The show would not be picked up for a third season, and was eventually dropped from ABC's rotations. Reruns continued to air in the United States on the USA Network during their USA Cartoon Express and USA Action Extreme Team morning blocks in the 90s, often being paired with Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog. Currently, reruns are aired by Starz. The show was aired in Canada on CTV Network, with its rotation lasting until September of 1995, in which the finale was shown a second time. In Europe, the show aired on UK Channel 4 between 1994 and 96. Years later, UK stations Pop and ITV2 replayed the series in syndication. The first season was shown on Ireland's RTE2, and the series was eventually also dubbed into Japanese, allegedly, though no apparent traces of said dubs seem to exist online as of this video's upload. I would be very curious to see them if anybody had them. The series takes place on planet Mobius, a planet mostly inhabited by anthropomorphic animals. The Kingdom of Acorn, based in the city of Mobitropolis, is at war with an unseen enemy. During the war, the king recruits a human scientist named Julian to build war machines in order to turn the tide of battle. However, during peacetime, Julian and his nephew Snively launch a coup d'etat against the kingdom. The king is banished to another dimension called the Void, which Julian establishes a connection with the help of a wizard named Naugus, who he also betrays by sealing into the Void. And the citizens are captured and transformed into mindless robots, through a machine called the Roboticizer that he stole from Sir Charles Hedgehog, which was initially intended to lengthen the lifespan of the elderly. Julian renames himself Dr. Robotnik and becomes the dark-hearted dictator of what he calls Robotropolis, a polluted cityscape littered with factories. Not one to take this lying down, Robotnik is opposed by Sonic the Hedgehog, who leads a ragtag group of freedom fighters who operate out of the secluded woodland village of Knothole, along with the former king's sole heir and daughter, Princess Sally. Other members include Sonic's friend Miles Tails Prower, tech expert Rotor the Walrus, a cowardly Frenchman Antoine Depardieu, the half-roboticized and super-strong Southern Belle Bunny Rabbit, and the clumsy but powerful Dulcie the Dragon. Sonic and his group act as an insurgency against Robotnik's regime, with Sonic in particular utilizing the might of the Power Rings, a temporary power booster invented by Sir Charles, who was also Sonic's uncle. This story, to me at least, creates an interesting dynamic with the scarce elements of Sonic lore that existed at this point in time. With very little to go on, it's understandable that any fully fleshed out film-friendly Sonic world would look very different than that of the one living in pixels.
All of my knowledge of Sonic came, first of all, with the first briefing I had for Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog when we were invited in to pitch premises. At that time, we were shown 3 or 4 levels of the video game on a video projection. We didn't play the game. And it was it didn't really connect with me, I think. It was sort of hard for me to see what that was going to be. But then there was a Bible, and that was Len Jansen. He was the one who created the Bible for it. The Bible is the part of animation that tells the writers who the characters are, what the interactions are between them, what the interrelationships are, what the world is, what their universe is like. And he, I think, changed a lot of the elements of Sonic to things that were more screen friendly. It was became more of an animation, almost feature film quality. And he worked with a number of writers in the first season of Saturday Morning. And then the second year, we were talking with Len, and he invited us in to take a look at the episodes from the earlier year, so that we could do an analysis of, what was good, what was bad, what worked, what didn't, what characters needed to be tweaked, what needed to be done.
In video games of the past, story was always supplemental to gameplay. Gameplay was almost always worked out first, with story elements being written around that gameplay to justify its existence. With television, there's no such restriction, and you can hardly create a television series based solely around getting from point A to point B of a level. With this in mind, it's honestly really interesting to see the dynamic between Sonic and Robotnik being tweaked to be less about a maniacal doctor with aspirations of world domination, often being stopped by a freedom-loving hero that always gets in his way, but rather to be about a horrifying and malicious dictator who has already got the world in the palm of his hand, and the struggle that ensues with the outliers of the remaining resistance banding together and trying to take him on. It's a very unifying kind of story outline, which endears not just Sonic, but the rest of the freedom fighters to their audience. You feel their struggle, you feel the odds being stacked against them, and you want them to succeed and finally defeat Robotnik, finally free the people enslaved by him. Also, I don't care that Sonic Forces also tried to do a similar plot. It was years and years later, and they didn't even do it half as well. Don't at me, I know what I'm talking.
Sonic, do you mind?
Not very well. Dogs mind, not hedgehogs.
This incarnation of Sonic is also arguably one of the most emotionally involved, allowing Sonic in particular to be fairly emotionally vulnerable, which is rare to see in modern incarnations of the character. In particular, the episode in which he's able to regain some semblance of contact with his uncle before seeing him change back into a worker bot against his will is some massively hard-hitting stuff that still gets me somewhat choked up to this day.
I should have saved him.
Y'all did what you could, honey. We couldn't bring him back. He's loyal to Robotnik.
We'll get him back another day, Sonic. Promise.
Yeah, and look what we did with Uncle Chuck. We totaled that crystal.
Of course, this story wouldn't work nearly as well without the charm of its principal cast, and there's a lot to say about them, too. With a show calling itself Sonic the Hedgehog, obviously you'd be inclined to believe the most important character in the show is Sonic. To a degree, you'd be right about that. He is the focal character of the show, often the main hero who saves the day, and is generally considered the leader of his group along with Sally. This doesn't mean, however, that the other characters aren't just as well developed and important to the overall scheme of things either.
Yes, we know that, Sonic.
And she puts her arm around him, and I get emotional, I get verklempt. But it's like, we really got into the characters, we got into their emotions, and we, again, with that whole edict of Len's, I'm not going to call it an edict, I'm going to call it a guideline, that there had to be wins and losses. It took a whole fabric of the animation that we were doing into something that was from cloth to velvet, so that you actually believed what was happening. And I think that's what's kept the series alive for so long, is that it's believable.
Before I get ahead of myself though, I guess I should focus on Sonic. At the end of the day, the show is about him, so it's probably most important that we tackle talking about how this show presents him before we talk about the others.
Softer? What do you mean, softer? Oh, I hate softer. Softer is for pillows, for ice creams. Music has gotta move. It's gotta be pedal to the metal. It's gotta...
Ballad.
Ballad? Schmallad? Nuh-uh. No way, man. Ballads make me wanna hurl. Ugh. Full chunkage contained.
Like in the game, Sonic is able to run at superhuman speeds and has a defiant attitude which is balanced by his courageousness, cleverness, and cunning. He's the only freedom fighter capable of using magical rings called Power Rings, developed by his Uncle Chuck for use as a momentary power booster, which grant him even greater strength and speed than usual. While often Sonic can be slower on the technical side of things, he has an unmatched knack for getting himself out of tight spots with intuitive thinking and quick reflexes. Conversely, he can also get himself into trouble with the tendency to rush into situations recklessly. Sonic speaks often in a coagulation of cheesy one-liners and 90s catchphrases, which can be a bit grating at times, but as a product of the time, it's only expected that a character like Sonic would be acting like this.
Good job, Sonic.
I know.
I'm so modest.
People don't get this sometimes about acting, but my job is to deliver what you want.
Regardless, despite that, he's still a very likable hero, even if he has his weak points, and I find that his tendency to show compassion and emotion is very refreshing for an action hero of the era. In addition, his voice work, performed by Jaleel White of Family Matters fame, is deeply iconic, and honestly not bad once you get past some of the cheesier lines he has to carry.
I had plenty of input on the character, I had no input on the stories. I deliberately wanted to make him, because I'm black, if you haven't noticed. I really wanted to make him just like, of no race. So when you listen to Sonic, I don't think you even get an impression that, it was like, is he black, is he white, is he surfer, is he whatever? No, instead he's just hero, just fast.
His voice is a pretty natural fit for Sonic in my opinion, and he gets the mix of attitude and caution down really well.
Way cool.
Princess Sally Acorn is the rightful princess of Mobotropolis and the main strategist of the Freedom Fighters. She's extremely intelligent and cautious, and often provides most of the brains when it comes to figuring out how to confront Robotnik's various traps and machines. Despite her focus on the technical side of things, however, Sally isn't one to sit out on physical prowess, being fairly athletic in her own right, and remaining fairly competitive towards Sonic despite being his love interest. In particular, I actually find the dynamic between Sonic and Sally from this show to be somewhat underrated.
Come on, Sal. With my looks and your brains, we're unstoppable.
You're partly right.
Which part?
Yes.
Vocal critics of the Sonic-Sally pairing often cite hang-ups from her characterization in the Archie comics as reasons why she's not a good fit for Sonic, while not quite seeing how different Sally's characterization in those comics could be from her animated counterpart. And, do I really need to remind everyone of how much Ken Penders ruins everything he touches? More on that later. I just really like the way they complement each other, I guess is the way I would put it. Sonic is very much the go-getter hero with the heart of gold, and he's got the power to match his words, but as much of a powerhouse as Sonic can often be, he's not exactly the sharpest tool in the shed, and can be rather careless when it comes to establishing a plan. Sally, on the other hand, does much more than just wing it, carrying herself with the prowess necessary to work her way through even some of the most impossible situations.
I was built for speed and born for danger. Speed is my middle name and danger is my game.
This is not a game, Sonic.
They cover each other in their weaker areas, and because of that, they make a good team. And I'm not the only one who thinks this way. Writer Ben Hurst had this to say about Sonic and Sally back in 1997. The wonderful thing about Sal is that not only is she strong and capable, she can give as well as get in any exchange with Sonic. She doesn't order him around, she cajoles, persuades, convinces him to go in the direction she suggests. But as we all know, if Sonic really doesn't want to go in her direction, it just plain old ain't gonna happen. To me, what truly sets Sally aside is her heart. She has a deep well of compassion she draws from, and though Sonic is equally compassionate, Sally has the ability to articulate her heartfelt feelings, which Sonic will then agree to with a, yeah, that. Bunny Rabbit is a half-rabbit, half-robot, who was only partly roboticized before being rescued. She's skilled in martial arts and has a southern accent, which, combined with the vocal talent of childhood favorite Christine Cavanaugh, may she rest in peace, makes her one of the most likable niche Sonic characters throughout the many canons, in my opinion.
And then little old Red Riding Hood said, "Why, Grandmama, what big red eyes y'all have." And the big ugly old wolf says, "The better to see y'all with, my dear." That wolf is nasty, huh, Bunny? Nasty as a one-eyed snake, Sugar.
Though she regrettably doesn't get as much screen time as some of the other characters, she's a genuine joy to see whenever she shows up, and enjoys a palpable and thoughtful chemistry with her friends. In particular, she often works to reassure the worries of Sally, whom she appears to be very close to, and acts very matronly to Tails as well. In fact, I guess you could argue that she acts very matronly to all of her friends, being incredibly kind-hearted to everyone in their moments of weakness. It seems like she's often insecure about her robot parts, but it's interesting to see how traditionally and unapologetically feminine she allows herself to present despite this setback. A lot of powerhouse girls, especially in older cartoons, are cordoned off and portrayed very differently than the stereotypical prim female characters, with special emphasis on how rough they are for a girl, quote-unquote. Though SatAM isn't exactly breaking ground on gender roles for its time,
I'm supposed to apologize to him for trying to steal my girl?
I am not your girl.
Since when?
Since forever.
I can wait.
it is, to me at least, very cool to see a character like Bunny who seems to enjoy and participate enthusiastically in presenting as very cute and ladylike, despite her status as somewhat of a teen bruiser and heavy lifter. It's encouraging to see that her strength isn't used against her to characterize her as less of a girl or not very feminine because of it. And especially for a 1993 cartoon, it's fairly refreshing to see. Antoine Depardieu, on the other hand, is much more of a mixed bag.
Slice of pie, n'est-ce pas? Antoine, it's a piece of cake. Yes, I'm happy this is so.
He's a jackal with a French accent whose clumsiness often gets him and others into danger and captured. He has difficulty speaking English and is incredibly driven to impress and woo Sally, which he often fails at due to his cowardice. In addition, he's the butt of many a joke at his expense, often from Sonic, but definitely not exclusively. He's the resident butt monkey of the series, basically, and while some of his shenanigans are somewhat entertaining, especially due to the vocal talents of the phenomenal Rob Paulsen, he can quickly become agitating in serious situations, and his characterization in retrospect feeds into some rather obnoxious French stereotypes which have not aged well at all on a modern rewatch.
I am right behind you, princess.
That's comforting.
Nevertheless, I definitely wouldn't say that Antoine ruins the show or anything. He's just a bump in the road on an otherwise mostly smooth ride, and even then he does get some pretty hilarious bits. In particular, I'm very fond of the sequence in which, upon being captured, Snively tries to torture him into talking by making him watch the preparation of traditional French dishes made in a completely haphazard and wrong way.
But escargots are too special, you fiend! They must be prepared just right, you maniac!
Yes, of course. We start with plump, juicy snails.
Oui?
A little garlic.
Oh, oui again.
And...
Butter? Oui, oui. Oh, yes, oui. Butter. Margarine! 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 You would cook escargot with margarine. Oh, but no! It will be too cruel, you fuel! Okay, I give. Uncle, I will tell you everything!
The remaining stragglers of the hero cast are a little less in-depth, but still fun regardless. Rotor is the mechanic of the village and provides useful inventions for missions. He's very technically adept and somewhat snarky at times, if a bit less ready to throw down than his fellow friends. He seems like a pretty chill guy who you'd want to get to know, although he does experience a rather strange character redesign and recast of voice actor between seasons 1 and 2, which...
Yeah, right. You're just gonna tool in there and ask.
Oh, I left it at Sonic's.
takes some getting used to. Tails is much more understated in this series than many of the other Sonic canons, being much less of a direct sidekick and more of a village child who looks up to all of the other characters, and rarely gets involved in missions. Although when he does come along for them, he often proves surprisingly bright for his age, and he also begins to hone his skills later on in training missions with Sonic.
I have to hand it to you, Sonic. That fake stone plan was brilliant!
Brilliant? Come on, it was Mondo Stupendo.
You may be Mondo Stupendo, but you are certainly not humble.
Moi? Not humble? I don't think so. After all, it wasn't my plan.
What? But I thought that...
Ladies and... ladies, meet the Planmeister! the way cool big guy.
Tails, you're amazing. Oh, this is so touching. 3 cheers for our newest freedom fighter.
Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray! Hip hip hooray!
Apparently, according to Ben Hurst, Tails was meant to come into his own more in Season 3, discovering some pretty awesome power within himself, but because of the series' cancellation, this never got the chance to be explored more deeply. Nicole is Sally's portable computer, which she uses to hack Robotnik's technology, and speaks in a monotone voice. Though most of the time she's very technical and only really displays data, she becomes a bit more relaxed later on in the series when, after being left behind with Sonic, she has to adapt to his simpler speech patterns to avoid him shaking her around in frustration.
Ambient energy radiating from target source southwest.
You want another shaking?
Hang a left.
And last but not least, on the hero side, we have Dulcie the Dragon, who provides the freedom fighters with transportation. She has powerful lungs that she can use to blow enemies away and also briefly use ice and fire breath. Although she's very mobile, she also often has trouble with landing properly and tends to crash mid-flight, making her fairly clumsy when it comes to precision. She's introduced in Season 2 rather suddenly, apparently the mandate of the network wanting another female freedom fighter to add to the main cast. Her addition, though debated, is, in my opinion, a pretty solid addition, as even though she can sometimes be grating, that's true of even Sonic himself, and a lot of the time she's much more charming than annoying, in my opinion. That leaves us with the opportunity to get down to business and discuss the villains of the show, and though there are very few of them, they certainly make an impression. And of course, where else would we start when describing the villains of the show than with the cream of the crop himself? Dr. Julian Robotnik is one of the foulest and most legitimately frightening incarnations of the Eggman character in all of Sonic media.
Why are we voice activating Uncle Julian?
We aren't. From now on, everything will answer only to my voice. Do you know what that means, Sniffly?
No, Uncle Julian.
It means you call me Sir.
Yes, sir.
From now on, Sniffly, you do exactly what I say.
Yes, sir.
He's a warlord who wants to cover the entire planet in machinery and transforms the entire population into his slaves. Though he's chiefly opposed by the freedom fighters, his obsession with destroying Sonic in particular often tends to be his downfall and plans, becoming the center of his focus and distracting him from other matters he should be attending to instead. Despite his track record of sabotage plans, however, the enormity of his victories so far can't be understated, and his unmitigated control combined with his often extreme cruelty make him extremely threatening and a viable threat despite how often he seems to be foiled. One thing that is immediately and noticeably different from this Robotnik from his game counterparts, aside from the extent of his control, is also the amount he seems to take stock in the overall events of many of his plans. In the games, Eggman is very much directly involved with most of his plans to destroy Sonic. His machines are vehicles that he controls firsthand, and though he does have various legions of robotic minions, he's not afraid to go in directly for the kill over and over again. By contrast, SatAM Robotnik rarely ever gets out of his chair. Though he does sometimes become a bit more hands-on, most of the time he just sits around and orders his subordinates to take specific actions. You might think that this would serve to make him less threatening, but I would actually argue the opposite. The point that this illustrates is how genuinely lowly he thinks of the rebellion against him. Though they anger him more than anything and he wants to destroy the insurgency at the end of the day, the freedom fighters do not scare Robotnik. They're so beneath him in his mind that getting directly involved is unnecessary. He already controls everything, so there's no need to put himself on the front lines when he can just command his many legions of robot soldiers to do everything he wants. To put it simply, he holds 90% of the cards. He would just rather also have the other 10 while he's at it. In addition to his iron-fisted rule, he's also incredibly physically and mentally abusive to his nephew and assistant Snively, whom, while also being a rotten person in his own right, stews and plots against him behind his back because of his active and constant mistreatment. While most of the time Snively's failure to please Robotnik is played for laughs at his expense, as the series goes on, these encounters become more and more disturbing to the point where you might even understand Snively's desire to get back at his uncle for how cruelly he's been put down by him. Oh, also, Robotnik is masterfully voiced by Jim Cummings, who you might recognize chiefly as the singing voice of Scar from The Lion King, but he's also the long-standing voice of Winnie the Pooh, so enjoy that mental image.
Did you say you had prisoners?
He's a pumpkin. Aren't you glad he doesn't do books on tape?
Call me Ishmael.
One of the most easily recognizable themes on the surface of Sonic SatAM is one of a somewhat environmentalist lean. The home of the Freedom Fighters in Knothole, and in other places untouched by Robotnik's influence, are often very immaculate, peaceful, and bright-looking. Meadows and trees are highlighted often by bright greens and blues, and the sun constantly shines brightly over it, emphasizing the beauty of nature. Meanwhile, areas that are occupied by Robotnik's forces, in particular Robotropolis, are very dark and dismal, dominated by grungy palettes and in particular a wide array of darker blues. Everything is subdued, mechanical, and often swarming with rubble and gray skies, highlighting just how artificial and hollow everything is. Drone ships cover the skies, enforcing a sense of constant danger. Smoke and smog constantly billow out towards the clouds, drenching the entire area with what feels like poison, sucking the life out of it. This contrast between the two perfectly visually highlights the difference between the two camps and their coinciding beliefs and ambitions, with Sonic and the Freedom Fighters resembling a love of individuality, beauty, and self-expression, while Robotnik represents a yearning for absolute domination, subjugation, and annihilation of all free will, for the sake of putting himself in a position of authority over all else. Authoritarianism. He's an authoritarian. You could also argue he's a bit of a Nazi surrogate, but thankfully this show didn't go the Penders route and try to make a direct Nazi parallel. God, Ken, I will get to you. This also leads into what I think to be the most important and currently relevant part of the series, which is also a major reason why I think this show deserved a video in the here and now. Fundamentally, at the core of it, Sonic SatAM is a show about radical action. People banding together to fight against a cruel and malicious system. A strong man with delusions of grandeur who doesn't respect their individuality, and the amount of sacrifice and familial support it takes to make that happen. And hey, I know what you might be thinking to yourself right now. Bruh, it's a cartoon about a blue talking hedgehog who runs really fast. It ain't that deep, lol. What are you even going on about? And to your credit, I understand the temptation to write this all off that way. Sonic the Hedgehog, at the end of the day, is a Saturday morning cartoon that ran for only 2 seasons in the 90s, based loosely on a series of popular mascot video games for children, and whose common lexicon includes the words mondo and problemo. It's not exactly the type of media that prompts the kind of artistic study you often see in Shakespearean discussion or in the hallowed halls of academia, but to me, it doesn't have to be resonant. Fighting in a world that cruelly insists that your demands for better are pointless and unwarranted is tough. And although the fantastical fantasy adventures of Sonic and his friends are obvious fiction, the struggles they embody of people trying to survive in a world that almost seems rigged against them, and just keeps throwing unfair challenge after unfair challenge in their way, it's very real, depressingly real, and very much still real now. More so now than it probably has been in a long, long time.
In fact, in the middle of the series, while we were writing it, and just the first 2 episodes have been released, we got this letter from a guy who was somewhere in the Midwest, and it was a 5-page letter, and Robbie London, who's one of the executives at DEEK, passed it on to me. And it was a 5-page letter on how we were a metaphor for the freedom of the United States. And it was very flattering, and it was from a man who was probably 45, 50 years old. And so I think we actually touched a chord by looking at some of the universal truths, which is that freedom is good, and that tyranny is bad, and then we worked the human element of that, although these were creatures, of course, but they were, in my mind, Sonic's a human, and Sally's a human, and these are all characters that are as alive to me as the people I know.
Let's stop for a second, though. Let's dial back a little bit. I could continue to get into this, but I think I might be jumping the gun just a little bit. I have other things I need to talk about before I go more heavily into my thesis statement, and I think it's best that we go ahead and get back into them now. Let's talk about some actual episodes of this show next. I think it will help illustrate my broader points by providing some more precise examples of the show's writing strengths, and also solidify what I think is so well done about the show's writing in particular. Season 1 of the show was far more episodic in nature than Season 2 ended up being. While many of the stories could often be compared to other cartoon fare of the era, there are some standout stories in here which I thoroughly enjoyed as well. The first proper episode after the pilot, Sonic Boom, for example, has a story focusing around Sally's attempts to locate her missing father, while Sonic tries to rescue a captured freedom fighter. In any other children's show at the time, it would be a no-brainer to expect that by the time the episode ended, at the very least, Sonic would rescue his friend. But here's the thing, he doesn't. He does try to come back and rescue him at one point, but by that time, Robotnik's forces are en route to follow and capture Sally, who is in the Dark Swamp with Antoine. And Cat, the captured freedom fighter, overheard this while being imprisoned. He insists Sonic ignore him and get going to save Sally, with Sonic promising to return later. But by the time Sonic does finally return close to the episode's end, Cat has been taken away, presumably roboticized. They are able to deliver a sabotage to some of Robotnik's machines as retribution for their friend, of course, but wow, he sure is just gone, huh? This isn't the only time that something like this happens either. There's the aforementioned mission involving the temporary return and loss of Uncle Chuck, which is genuinely pretty heartbreaking, particularly for Sonic's character. And there's also Warp Sonic, which delves into the ambiguity of moral choices in a wartime situation, with a new accomplice of the Freedom Fighters double-crossing them and trying to steal their power supply, but only because of their dwindling resources. Ultimately, despite being tricked and exploited by the other camp's leaders, Sonic still risks his life to save them, and grants them half of the power supply that they tried to steal, emphasizing that the only way they'll be able to defeat Robotnik is through unified action, that they can't afford to disrupt with petty squabbles. It's honestly a rather mature take on an episodic conflict, which pretty smartly handles the subject of the blurry line of right and wrong and morality, particularly when it comes to times of war, especially for a cartoon from the 90s, which are almost exclusively known for their tendency to emphasize very basic good versus evil stories. Speaking of surprisingly mature takes, the found family material involving the Freedom Fighters is often very sobering and heartfelt as well. The characters experience real loss and sadness in their hang-ups, and they're very understandable. They have fears and suspicions that arise from the trauma and failures they've already experienced, and it can be extremely difficult for a person to overcome those things alone.
Nuh-uh. Baby T was my friend.
He wouldn't like living with us, big guy. He'd miss his mom.
I miss my mom, too.
That's why they always stick together and build each other up, fight with each other. Season 2 takes a slightly different approach from the first, and what results from it is something that, no joke, was actually revolutionary in the world of children's animated television, the effects of which you have most certainly noticed in other shows, even if you didn't know it. For Season 2, Lynn Jansen wanted to shake things up, and invited writers Ben Hurst and Pat Alley to work together and brainstorm with him to come up with a direction for the new season.
And in that conversation and in that session where we watched all 13 episodes right in a row, somehow or other the idea surfaced, wouldn't it be interesting to take a 13-episode series and arc it in the same way as a motion picture?
Divided into smaller, more self-contained chunks, which could also feed into each other as part of a larger ongoing narrative. Each episode, with the exception of the two-part special Blast to the Past, was written to ensure they could both stand on their own and tie back into the ongoing plot, with a 13-episode outline being produced ahead of production that would guide the team in the months to come. The season was an experiment that had not been attempted at such lengths in children's animation before, at least not in America. Anime was already well underway in producing family-friendly narrative-heavy stories in the 90s over in Japan, but for American television this was still quite the rarity at the time, now much more common in shows like Steven Universe, among others. It's doubtless that this narrative style would probably have come to prominence in children's animation at some point, even if SatAM hadn't done it, but the fact that it appears to have done so first, or at the very least very ahead of its time, comes across as very noteworthy to me. This also proceeded to drive up the investment and attachment to the characters of the story, as Robotnik's hinted doomsday project would leer in the background of the entire season, continuously threatening the gang with a threat that never quite got out of your head. This season also introduced other groups of freedom fighters that would join in the battle against Robotnik, further emphasizing the themes of the series and giving rise to more interesting and diverse ways of approaching group missions. Uncle Chuck permanently regains his thought and acts as a spy for the Resistance from within Robotnik's base, sending messages via a carrier pigeon-esque system. And the characters learn more about the aforementioned Void, which Robotnik used to seal away the king and the sorcerer Nagus. Speaking of Nagus, he's practically the only character in the entire show that you ever see absolutely terrify Robotnik, and it's genuinely very entertaining to see him forcibly turn the dictator's head into a pig's and force him to eat dirt. Like, Seriously. Me too, Snively. Although there are plenty of standout episodes in the pack, of course, the best of the best obviously goes to both parts of Blast to the Past and the finale, The Doomsday Project. The former is a story centering around Sonic and Sally using a pair of magical time stones to try and travel to the past and stop Robotnik's takeover prior to its completion. What ends up happening instead is that they arrive too late, and while they're unable to prevent any of the actual events from happening, they're still able to retrieve valuable data from the old roboticizer plans, which they can ultimately try to use to figure out a way to de-roboticize some of the worker bots. In addition, they also meet their younger selves, and relatives that they've long lost, which provides for both some very funny and heartbreaking material in its own right. Also, the king is voiced by Tim Curry? Like, no, seriously, the Tim Curry is in the show, and he kills it!
Sally?
Yes, Daddy?
The royal signet. What is our secret family credo?
To rule with honor.
Sally, it is you!
Daddy, it's true. Julian is going to take over.
He's awesome! My only gripes with this story are small ones, and really they don't actually detract much from the episodes themselves. They just make me consider some changes that I would have made. The episodes on their own seem to suggest, for example, that Sonic and Sally interfering with the past creates small differences within the timeline, suggesting that, of course, their time travel wasn't actually originally something they observed happening before, when they were kids. I think this is kind of a missed opportunity, because little Sonic obviously somewhat admires his future counterpart, under the impression that he's a distant cousin, and I think this would have been a good opportunity to flesh Sonic out. Presume that maybe the time travel thing was accounted for in Sonic's past, and he really did think of that older blue hedgehog as a relative. Maybe he was inspired by the bravery and selfless heroism of that guy, and decided to try and live up to his example when he never returned, and maybe was presumably captured and roboticized like his uncle. Maybe Sonic struggles with wondering over time if he's ever been as good of a hero as that guy. And then, when he travels to the past with Sally, he reacts naturally to cover himself in front of his younger counterpart, and boom, it hits him. I was always my own hero all along. And you know what? I'm not gonna stop now. Anyway, sorry for my fanfiction mid-video, I'll get back on topic. I also really love the part where Sonic bursts in to save the past freedom fighters from being roboticized. Because when Robotnik grabs Sonic demanding to know who he is, and Sonic replies,
"Someone you're gonna learn to hate, Robotnik."
Ooh, I felt that. Also balding Snively. The final episode, as well, is extremely satisfying, climactic, and explosive, and delivers on pretty much everything you could have asked for. Robotnik's plan is suitably destructive and provokes much more of a dire fear reaction than practically any of his other plans up to this point. Sonic has his closest call yet with the roboticizer, teams are getting captured left and right. It really is all coming down to this confrontation where the freedom fighters have no idea if they'll even live to see the light of the day. It's easy to get lost in the formula of the show, to realize that despite their losses, the freedom fighters will always get back up and fight again. They'll succeed where it counts, and they'll come up with some other idea to thwart Robotnik's plans. So it's pretty sobering when this moment hits, and for even the briefest moment, you allow your suspension of disbelief to kick in. You see past the network demand, the writing mandates, the everything. This is the season finale. And not only that, it's the most dangerous and skin-of-the-teeth situation this group of characters, whom you've genuinely grown to care about and root for, have ever been in. It's scary. Tensions run high, and when more and more of their allies are captured, it's easy to see where Sonic is coming from when he demands to go alone for the final strategy. He can't stand the thought that all of them might go down at once. All of them might sink. But then Sally denies his insistence, denies his plea to go alone. And she says something I truly love.
No way, Sal.
We are in this together, Sonic Hedgehog. However it ends.
And that really stuck with me. Because she's right. And thankfully, when Sonic and Sally join hands in their last attempt, the Power Stones combined, they succeed in the face of overwhelming odds. They do it. They defeat Robotnik, if even for just a temporary time. Freedom is finally on the horizon, despite the challenges they may still be yet to face. And then the show was canceled. The final episode of Sonic SatAM aired on December 3rd, 1994. Despite starring one of the most iconic faces in gaming, it was unable to garner the momentum for another season, despite the team's plans to follow through with one. Throughout all of its run, SatAM was forced to contend with the rise of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, and while at first ABC attempted to mitigate this issue by moving Sonic to a new time slot, Fox Kids responded by moving Power Rangers to the exact same time slot. In addition, major markets chose to preempt some or all of ABC's Saturday morning lineup for local newscasts and sporting events. The show was swarmed in the ratings and had nothing but apathy from network affiliates. At the same time, the final nail in the coffin was delivered in the form of a new president of children's programming being hired at ABC. The new network structure, dominated by ABC's newfound owner, the Walt Disney Company, had no interest in pursuing a third season. The show was quietly canceled and taken off the air. The cliffhanger the show ended on was never resolved. But main writer Ben Hurst had never given up hope.
When you leave any task unfinished, when you've left anything on a high note, and you're ready to jump back in, and it's suddenly taken away from you, you're always going to be disappointed. I didn't realize that disappointment would be carried forward through a fan base for 10 years, and still the cry is out there. But as they say in Hollywood, which is true, everything can change with one phone call. I mean, my dream is that Sega or Deke or whoever else is up there decides one day, you know what, this worked. Let's do the third season. The third season is something that I feel very strongly about and always have.
Ben continued to hold out with the desire to make the third season a reality. Over the years, he attempted time and time again to drum up interest in the powers that be to greenlight it, or at least a feature film that might allow him to resolve the cliffhanger. His passion for the series eventually carried him to the position of story editor for Sonic Underground, which he was not allowed to change any of the premise of despite his protests. To quote from Mr. Hurst himself from around circa 1998, Sonic Underground was a sad, sad story. With the opportunity looming large for the third season of SatAM, Deke made a creative decision to trash that continuity and strike out in a new direction. The reason? Because they could add songs with the whole Sonic, Sonya, and Manic thing and collect extra residuals from ASCAP/BMI, the group that pays song royalties. Deke makes deals with songwriters to split or sign over the rights to their compositions, exactly the same way they force the writers and story editors to sign over all the rights to their stories. All residual payments for cartoons go to Deke, even the royalties set aside for creative people in Europe, based on blank videotapes and audio cassette sales. There have been legal battles about that through the Writers Guild, but the only reputable animation producer in America, to my knowledge, to hand those monies over to the writers was Warner Brothers. I've actually received royalty checks from the European release of episodes that Pat Alley and I wrote for Tiny Toons. Here's how Sonic Underground happened. After SatAM was canned because of a change in leadership at ABC and low ratings caused by multiple preemptions caused by sporting events and finally being placed up against the red-hot Power Rangers, now there's some genius programming strategy, a new version of Sonic was created, Sonic Underground. Did they ask me or Pat or Len Jansen to develop the series? No. In fact, I never heard of the series before a Deke story editor called and asked me and Pat to come to a cattle call for Sonic Underground. I refused. We don't do cattle calls, which, for those of you unfamiliar with the term, is where they bring in about 20 writers to learn about a series and pitch written premises for free in hopes of snagging an episode or two. The story editor got us there by guaranteeing us at least a few episodes, so off we went to a conference room at Deke. We got there and, yep, 20 writers. They showed an episode of SatAM, first season, to illustrate the background of the characters. It wasn't one of mine or Pat's, it was one of the other episodes. After they described the marvelous new direction, siblings, music, missing mothers, stupid new characters, they ended the meeting. We were taken into another room with the story editor who told us he wanted us to write the pilot episode. We did. Sega read the script, then the story editor was fired and we were hired. They also hired another team of story editors who survived through about 8 episodes before they left. We also got a few fledgling writers shoved down our throat by the producer. Results? I had to rewrite their damned unusable scripts from page 1. They still got paid for the script, I got nada. We tried our best to get some lore going, but Deke was racing through the series at 2 episodes a week, an insane pace and one calculated to maximize their profits. We managed to get a 3-part origin story through, but with the limited time, we were unable to tie everything together. The only bright spot was that we got assigned 6 scripts to Len Jansen, who wrote some damn nice stuff. So that's the saga of SU. As I rewatch some of the episodes, I'm surprised it's as good as it is. I'm fully aware that it doesn't match up to SatAM, and I would give my eye teeth to be hired to do the SatAM 3rd season. But the only way for that to happen would be some visionary exec at DiC to realize they're sitting on a gold mine. Silence continued for a while, until Ben tried to consult directly with DiC. He asked them if there was a way to generate some enthusiasm for a prospective feature film as a substitute for the third season, after which he was given a name, a Sega executives, with whom Ben promptly had a pleasant conversation. She had to go to a meeting, but she said she'd like to talk more about the idea. The next day, Ben got a call from someone else. A call from a guy named Ken Penders. Part 6. F*** you, Ken!
Let me get him! Let me get him!
Ken Penders, for those of you who don't know, is a former and main writer for the Archie Sonic the Hedgehog comic book series. He was born in a small pocket of hell wherein he decided that the only thing he ever wanted to do for the rest of his life was ruin children's properties and make out with Knuckles. Okay, I'm sorry, that was uncalled for. Ken hasn't never written anything of quality for the Sonic franchise. He just very rarely has. In addition to his rather atrocious art style, Ken had a tendency to really wax increasingly strange poetic in his attempts to make the story of the Sonic comics much more mature and dark, which, unlike SatAM, did not turn out well. It resulted mostly in a bunch of really convoluted BS, bad dads who were apparently not supposed to be bad dads, despite being horrible, and really undercutting the female cast because of course he did.
Less than 50 issues in, he tries to kill Princess Sally off because, and I quote, "Main reason I wanted to kill off Princess Sally back in the day, felt she made Sonic into a second banana and cramped his style. So you tried to kill her?"
This isn't the only time he's done Sally dirty either. He gets her into one of his many stupid love triangles, most notably with one of his favorite original character do-not-steals, Jeffrey St. John. In many notable examples of this, Sally would make out with Jeff, make Sonic jealous, and they'd fight about it. Jeff was supposed to be the older, more mature freedom fighter who... Wait, how much older are we talking here? Well, Pender says that Jeffrey is college-aged, and Sally is 15 years old. FBI, open up! Well, okay, I'd hope at some point he maybe, I don't know, dialed that back publicly or something. Nope! He made it even worse somehow! One story I couldn't tell was Sally losing her virginity to Jeffrey. Sonic may be fast, but Jeffrey was faster on the draw in that department. You know what? I take back what I said earlier about insulting Ken being uncalled for, because this is just totally vile. This is who Ken Penders is. The female character in his love triangle could barely even be called an active player in said triangle. She's just the meat. The prize to be fought over by the boys, who was taken by Jeffrey before Sonic, like somehow she's now ruined for him because Jeffrey got her. Oh yeah, there's also the time where he rephrased Martin Mahler's First They Came to be about echidnas and hedgehogs. Fuck you, Ken. So anyway, that Ken Penders got in touch with Ben Hurst on the phone that day, and I'll let Ben's own words describe the events that transpired from there. Remember, this was possibly the last chance that Ben ever had to get SatAM back on Sega's radar, to continue the show from where it left off. This is what happened. The next day, I got a call from Ken Penders, who had been alerted by his contact in their office that I was interested in getting a Sonic movie going. I generously offered to include him in the effort and told him my strategy: get Sega to become invested in the idea by hiring us to interview their creative game designers, executives, etc., and see if we could develop a storyline that would fulfill the third season and simultaneously give them creative ideas to develop new games. A win-win situation. Then I called Sega back, but I was shocked when the exec lit into me, telling me, "People pay us to develop Sonic products, we don't pay them." Then she hung up on me. Obviously, Penders had relayed my strategy to them in a less than flattering way. Thanks for the knife, Ken. So I gave up. Later, I was informed by friendly fans that Penders had written in his message board or some such place that Ben Hurst doesn't know how movies are made in Hollywood. Hey Ken, read Adventures in Screenwriting by William Goldman and get some humility. Then he dropped hints that he would be the writer for a big Sonic feature film. That was 3 years ago. Oh, and what of that feature film that Ken so knew he was to be the writer of? That brilliant magnum opus that was worth dashing the final hopes of a man who so earnestly wanted to conclude his passion project that he held so dear to his heart. Oh. Oh? Now, I want to go on the record to clarify that I am not in support of sending any harassment to Ken. As much as I detest the guy, I never condone that sort of behavior, and if you do that sort of thing, you're never doing it with my support. That being said, holy shit, he really made a pitch video to Sega that looked like this.
Whoa. This is way past cool.
This is what he sabotaged SatAM for, folks. This is what Ken Penders thought was so good that he'd just trash Ben Hurst's entire chance of finally completing the series. This!
Whoa.
It's really sad that Ben's continuation never came to pass. He seemed to have a lot of ideas for where the proposed season would go, and they all sounded great. Added prominence for Tails, a sense of listlessness in Sonic who has nothing to do as a hero in a peaceful time, the rise of Naugus and Nicole origin story, it all sounded so cool, and we'll probably never see it. Not the way Ben imagined, anyway. In reading through Ben's notes on the internet over the years, in preparation to script this video, I came across an anecdote of his from around 2005, around 5 years before his death, and it really stuck out to me. I'm not here to raise false hopes, but know this, I am as much of a fan of SatAM as all of you, if not more. I've written on numerous shows, created large outdoor spectacle attractions for special events and theme parks, written and served as concept developer on exhibits for the Smithsonian Institution, with another one currently in development, and for entire museums. And I've served as consultant to develop storylines for theme park attractions and museums around the country and around the world. In short, my life has been an amazing adventure filled with incredible experiences. But, and I emphasize this, of all the storylines I've had the pleasure to participate in, the one that has captured and held my heart is the saga of the Little Blue Hedgehog. People ask why I decided to comment after all these years. I'll tell you. There was a two-part script I had poured my heart into. A two-part script that I had fought battles over with both Sega and ABC executives in order to bring to the light of day. This script was, in my opinion, the defining moment of SatAM. I'm sure you've already guessed it was Blast in the Past. I was supported in my struggle by both Lynn Jansen and Pat Alley, and we prevailed. They also had a large hand in the writing and editing, and without them, it would never have shined as brightly as it did. Although the odds are stacked against my participating in another incarnation of SatAM, don't ever for a moment believe that I have given up hope. Don't ever for a moment believe that ideas aren't percolating inside me every day. Not a day goes by that I don't jot another post-it to add to the very large pile. Big thanks to the incredible fan who provided an entire box of them imprinted with an image of Sonic. The odds are beyond belief long, but I now have yet another reason to reignite my desire to continue on my quixotic quest to complete the work I started on SatAM. On April 1st, I sat in a hospital while my best friend and wonderful husband to my lovely sister of 35 years was undergoing what we thought was a routine surgery for a minor cancer. Then I sat in shock as the surgeon came out of the operating room 2 hours early and told me that he had found a rare form of cancer known for its stealth ability to hide from x-rays and CAT scans. It had spread through most of his major organs and his body cavity. In shock and sorrow, I held my completely devastated sister, and after we finally managed to pull ourselves together, she asked me to tell him the dreadful news we had just received from the surgeon. He only has between 3 to 6 months to live, 9 months to a year if he takes chemotherapy. Never in my life have I wanted more to hear someone say the words, "April Fools!" But on this particular April 1st, that was not to happen. I'll spare you the sad details, but after the initial shock, my brother-in-law shook his head and quite calmly accepted the news. He's decided not to take the chemo. He saw the effects it had on my mother, robbing her of any joy in life and taking away her will to seize the day. So instead of moping about or being sad, he's making plans to visit places he and my sister have wanted to visit. He plans to use his remaining time to celebrate all that is good about life and realize some of the dreams he has postponed. As Obi-Wan would say, the Force is strong in this one. Today, I had long conversations with him filled with laughter and memories, including how he and my sister and their children have always been big fans of the shows we've written on, particularly Captain Planet and Sonic. He knows all about the Sonic saga and the personal storylines surrounding it. And as we were discussing it, he reminded me that none of us know how long we will be allowed to stay here on Earth. Then he put his hand on my shoulder and informed me, "You gotta follow your dreams." And with a grin, he added, "Juice and jam time for both of us." So, I've decided that after finishing the 2 projects I'm working on, I'm going to explore the possibilities of pursuing the 3rd season or the movie one last time. If I succeed, then good. If I fail, then I gave it my all. 3 fans, sworn to secrecy, know that there is a 3rd option, and that will be revealed if all else fails. To all of you who have been kind and encouraging, my heartfelt thanks and best wishes. And take care.
We fell in love with what we were doing, which is really unusual. It wasn't just a job, it was truly an adventure for us as much as it was an adventure that became something on the screen. Everybody would gather to watch the footage as though they were getting an Easter basket. And they would get pizza and they would sit around, and instead of just 1 or 2 people reviewing the footage and taking care of it, it was an entire, the entire assemblage of people and cheering when it was good and booing when it was bad. So it was a group effort.
Ben Hurst passed away on August 10th, 2010 from complications relating to diabetes. So, what is it about Sonic SatAM that drives its niche of fans to remain so invested in it so long after its initial airing? After the one remaining champion for its continuation has passed and his final notes have been dispersed for internet viewing? Well, there's a number of reasons to love this show. There's the charming characters, the breathtaking artwork, the impressive tonal balancing, the genuine pathos and human emotional attachment it provokes. But most of all, to me, I think what it most strongly provokes is the feeling of unification and power in the face of uncertainty and cruelty. The Freedom Fighters are not people with incredible powers, able to save the day at a moment's notice from any perceived threat before it ever gets off the ground. They're a rebel force of young, passionate, eco-terrorists, to be completely honest, who know that they're being hunted by an opponent much more equipped and powerful than them, hell-bent on making them bend a knee and become obedient slaves. Obviously, there is embellishment here. There is fantasy. But there's also an underlying layer of reality to this very plot. There's emotional stakes here, reasons to get invested, people to see both yourself in and feel inspired by. This little show, which started as nothing more than a part of a larger marketing attempt for a video game character to boost sales, touched on something so deeply that I think a majority of its best qualities could still hold up even today. The Freedom Fighters aren't an unbelievable fantasy group to be a part of. They're reflective of so many people who are struggling here and now, in big ways and in small. There's always going to be somebody who thinks they can stand at the top of it all, deny you your due rights, and kick you down because you don't belong.
We're there!
Maybe people ridicule or mock your sense of self. Maybe people turn a blind eye to your suffering. Or maybe you too are familiar with the injustices of the power that is misused against you and your fellow people.
No! No, I will not go home!
We are here for love! We are not here to spread hate!
Incredible power. Yes! It could work!
Yo, Robotnik! Give it your best shot!
There is always injustice, always cruelty, and always something to fight for against those things. And there will be people like Julian who think they can get away with it, convince you that their way of thinking is right. But maybe they're not right about that. Maybe you don't have to let them think that they are either. And you may think to yourself, well, that's a lovely idea, but what can I do? What action can I take? And you know, you're a lot more important than you think. Because while it's true that the individual can only do so much, the many can do anything. We're all in this together, and if we make ourselves known, if we never give up, and we cooperate with each other to build a brighter world, we might just overcome doomsday after all. Or, at the very least, push it back, right?
The most rewarding thing about children's animation is that it doesn't die. You know, there are generations that are still unborn that will watch episodes of Sonic the Hedgehog, and it has a shelf life that's almost forever.
So, maybe give Sonic SatAM a watch. It may not turn out to be your thing, but I definitely think at the very least it's worth your time, even if just for a little bit. And it's definitely the cartoon we deserve.
But hey, I know you may have reservations. What if I end up really liking it? The show was canceled, so if I get invested in it, then I'll be sad when it's over, right? But there are still ways to change that, if you're willing to try.
The website, Fans United for SatAM, is host to a group called Team Season 3, a pack of talented and passionate professionals from various fields dedicating their efforts and knowledge to revive SatAM into a fully animated continuation online. The actual work in progress we've been able to see so far has been legitimately great looking, and they're allegedly using a lot of Ben's proposed notes to make the story happen. They've also recruited the original composer for the show to provide a soundtrack, which is an amazing feat. They're not endorsed by Sega or DiC, but claim to be looking into potentially partnering with them if given the opportunity, and maybe even distributing to Netflix if the deal goes through. Otherwise, they still plan to release it for free online. Their work looks great, but obviously this undertaking's going to be extremely time-consuming and expensive, so if you want to support their work and the legacy of this wonderful, underrated series, please consider donating to their Patreon. I personally can't wait to see what they have in store, and every penny counts. And of course, you can always support my work on my Patreon, where you can get tier rewards for your trouble, and you can also talk to me about Sonic and other things on my Twitter, which is @NezumiVA. I have one more major video besides my upcoming Q&A planned for before the end of the year, which I'm really going to have to haul on to get done. As for what it's about, well, let's just say I'm not quite done talking about a certain blue hedgehog for this month just yet. In addition, if you'd like to see more of my musings on those wild Archie Sonic comics, I have an ongoing though sparsely updating series about them called Archie Sonic Dissected, which you can find a playlist for on my channel. And that's all for me from today. I hope you took something away from this video. I hope at the very least you were entertained by it. And at most, maybe you feel a little bit more ready to face the world tomorrow. And I look forward to doing it with you. All of you. In the immortal words of your pal and mine, Sonic the Hedgehog, let's do it to it.